Welcome back to the Mindful Guy as we dive into the topic of mental health, mainly anxiety and depression. I'm not a trained mental health practitioner. I have no qualifications whatsoever. I'm merely sharing my own experience as a recovered sufferer. And if you know of anyone who is struggling with mental health right now and you believe they could be a harm to themselves or others, please contact your GP or emergency health services. On August 11th, 2023, I'd reached a low point in my life. I felt like my life had come crashing down around me, and I tried to unalive myself. But by the 17th of November 2023, I was discharged from the mental health circuit. Why am I telling you this? I need you to understand that no matter how bad it gets, there is a way to overcome your past traumas and future worries. I'm Mark, and welcome to the Mindful Guy podcast, where we discuss everything around mental health, especially anxiety and depression. The aim of this podcast isn't to provide medical advice, as I'm not a practicing mental health specialist. I have no qualifications other than my own experience around this pandemic. And I say pandemic because mental illness is on the rise, as people battle the struggles of life, whether past, present, or future. This podcast is dedicated to those who have suffered, are suffering, and will suffer from mental illness in the future. It could be there as a source of comfort for those who feel alone in their darkest hour, or it could be a source of information for those who know personally someone who's struggling with this debilitating condition. However, that being said, my caveat here is, if you know someone who's struggling and you believe they could be a harm to themselves or others, please contact your nearest general practitioner or emergency services to get help. The idea around this podcast is to provide you with the understanding of what happens when you suffer from anxiety and depression, as well as provide some practical information, techniques, and tools that work. Now, I need to make it clear off the bat here that there is no magic pill that you can take and you're better. No, it takes practice and work to dig your way out of this mental hole. So to give you some idea of what I'm saying is true, I'm going to share with you my story. My story should only be seen as a reference to the fact that everyone in their own way experiences difficulties in life, traumas or circumstances that slow you down until you eventually freeze with fear. And there is no specific time for mental illness to show up. It just does. But you can beat it, and I'm living proof of that. And so are the team behind the scenes. All of us have been there, and some multiple times. So with that in mind, allow me to share my story. I was born in the UK and moved to South Africa in 1984 with my parents when I was only 9 years old. My life growing up was pretty standard, as you might expect in suburban living. My parents were there for me physically, meeting my childhood requirements, but they weren't really there for me emotionally. I mean, I'm a Gen X baby, and if you know anything about baby boomer parents, they had lots of kids and their attention was divided. I grew up with 3 other siblings and was basically left up to my own devices. School was okay, but in high school in 1988, I was bullied a lot, to the point I'd skip school. It was a very traumatic time for me, as my parents didn't really get involved because if they did, it would have gotten worse. However, the bullying placed a belief in my head that if I thought carefully, I could outsmart others, which gave me a sense of control over the situation. Fast forward to 2001, and 2 of the biggest crossroads came together in that same year. I got married and got my dream job as a copywriter in the advertising industry. I thought I had it made. Then in 2003, my first daughter was born. And 3 years later, in 2006, my second daughter was born. For the 3 years that followed, life was good. It was probably the best time of my life. In 2009, things took a turn for the worst. I got made redundant for the first time. This is something that would happen 7 more times over my 23-year career. I lost my job and we were forced to relocate about 450 miles away. Little did I know it was the beginning of the end of my marriage, as in 2011 my ex-wife and I divorced. It was tough because my ex-wife could be very difficult to get along with, as she would shut herself down and ignore me for up to 2 weeks sometimes. The move just amplified it, and we split. I used to go home to an empty house every day. What was once a house full of life and children's laughter became total silence. It crushed me, as I didn't know how to outsmart this challenge. So instead of facing it, I got involved with another woman that led me to this point where I'm talking to you now. 4 months after I split with my ex-wife, I met another woman who was younger than me with 2 kids of her own and a sister she saved from being orphaned after her mother was unalived by her stepfather. I was broken from my divorce, and her little family was broken from the tragic events that happened just months before we met. This woman was everything my ex-wife wasn't. And when I think back now, I realize there were loads of red flags that I ignored. To cut a long story really short, I lived with this woman, taking care of her and her little family for around 8 years. I bought houses, cars, and financed their lives. I had 2 sons with her. One died in my arms, and the other I didn't see now that we've split, and I returned to the UK. I haven't seen him or spoken to him for the last 3 years. I also found out after our split that she was having an affair with her boss the entire time she was with me. Looking back, as I mentioned, I saw those red flags, but I just put it down to an overactive imagination, the business trips, and her undying need to please him. After my first son, who was only 5.5 months in the womb, he had a condition called bilateral multicystic kidneys. In short, he didn't produce any amniotic fluid that was vital for his development. 5.5 months into the pregnancy, we had no choice but to abort. When they handed him to me, they said he would be stillborn. But he wasn't. I remember how warm his body was. I looked at him, I told him his name. He took a really deep breath, made a crying sound, and passed away in my arms. She told me later that she had tried to abort him without telling me by taking the morning after pill 2 months into the pregnancy. So there I was in 2019 with all these things going around in my head. I was angry, lost, confused, bitter, and every other emotion you might expect from something like this. But it was only the halfway point in my story. As this relationship fell apart, I met a new sibling who my dad had fathered between his first wife and my mum. He was never told about this daughter. She found him through one of those DNA matching sites. She came into my life as a huge support just when I needed her. She met my girls and my son in South Africa. We became very good friends. She was kind and generous and took an interest in my life where my parents and other siblings didn't seem to care. She invited us to the UK in 2019 for Christmas. My daughters were so excited, but unfortunately my son wasn't allowed to go because of my ex-partner. My sister told me that if I feel like returning to the UK, she and her husband, who claimed to be ex-SAS, would support us as we got on our feet. After the Christmas visit, we decided to accept their offer, and we arrived the day after lockdown in 2020. And at this point, I think it's important to highlight that I went from a fully functioning country to literally a jail cell for about 18 months. I couldn't get work, I had no money, and was completely dependent on my new sister. I was also so busy running from my past that it caught up with me. I started to feel very depressed, but I kept it from everyone. Then my new sister went from being this kind woman to a very, very toxic person, as she had a really difficult upbringing, and so did her husband, who was a victim of physical and emotional abuse. She became very controlling, and she would go looking for problems where there weren't none. She would cause fights, then get in over her head, and when she couldn't fight back, she would call her husband in to take care of things physically. And on the 17th of August, 2021, she assaulted my eldest daughter in front of me and my youngest daughter. This was another extremely traumatic situation, as I couldn't protect my children against her and her husband. When we eventually moved out, she demanded a key to my house. When I refused, she sent her husband after me, who threatened me over the phone while I was at work for more than an hour. She began stalking us and showing up at our house late at night, wondering why I refused to give her a key. It got so bad I got the police, both my daughter's school, and social services involved. But fortunately, when the police got involved and had a word with them, things settled down. And in the 18 months that followed, I could feel the weight of my past traumas bearing down on me. Then, once again, in March 2023, for the 7th time, I was unemployed. This period of unemployment lasted for about 3 months. Then I got offered another position at a small agency in Birmingham, but I haven't even completed my 2 months of probation period, and they let me go again, along with 4 others. And that was the 11th of August, 2023, the day my dam broke. It was between all of this that my dad died and my brother and I stopped talking over a bad business partnership, amongst other things. After all is said and done, I'm still here. I found a way to pull back from the brink and put my life on the right track. This is why we created the Mindful Guy podcast, to show you that no matter how bad or tragic your story is, and with some hard work and practice, you can prevail too. It's time to heal. You can heal too. Let me know if this helps, and I'll see you again on the next episode of The Mindful Guy. If you like what you hear and this is of interest to you, please click the subscribe and notification buttons for more content on anxiety and depression with me, The Mindful Guy.